You guys better appreciate what I do for y'all. This campaign was a slog to get through. So, as promised, I'm back with Russia in Kaiserreich to try out one of the different paths. This playthrough definitely put my Hoi 4 skills to the test since I'm still running with the better AI mod, and I can definitely say the mod delivered on its promises with the things I was seeing late game. So, buckle in guys, cause I'm pretty sure this is one of my longest running campaigns yet. I'm assuming most of y'all saw the last Russia video, so I'll briefly recap the beginning lore. Savinkov became the leader of Russia and is trying to set up a dictatorship. Tired of being stalled, he has his main political opposition killed, and then frames his main military opposition as responsible, so he gets eliminated too. However, in this timeline, instead of Savinkov taking charge and locking down support for his rule, he's gonna be messing everything up. First, we gotta rile up the people. The Russian people have this weird idea that their government is supposed to help them during a recession and think that if they keep asking for it, we'll listen. If anyone brings up how this isn't working well, we ignore them and double down. The military will also ask for stuff as well, but they caught on to Savinkov not actually listening to them in their meetings, and they got mad too. Unsurprisingly, this strategy of governing blew up in his face. Literally, someone threw a grenade at him while he was making a speech and he died. Now we have Matushka Marina in charge of the new Russian Socialist Provisional Government. By going socialist, Russia has a new focus tree. The military makes a last-ditch attempt to rally support for a counter-coup, but it goes nowhere.
We get to start over somewhere new.
Most remaining officers after that see no point in fighting, just decide to accept the new government and walk away from the military. This leaves the officer corps in a bleak state. This is what our generals are looking like before the resignations, and this is what it's looking like after. It's not bad for too long. With the revolution succeeding in Russia, all the surviving Bolshevik exiles start coming back to fill up the officer ranks. With things settling down, it was time to start establishing what the government is going to look like. Obviously, a government by the workers, for the workers, doesn't need the inclusion of peasants much. As we support our comrades in Spain, the first elections finish and we now have the Workers' Coalition. A lot of words here, but basically keep everyone happy or else the government falls apart. Despite taking over the country through mostly peaceful means, somehow there is a lingering resistance against this leftist regime, and we gotta weed it out. After doing the war on peasants focus, the peasant party had some choice words for me.
You know how much I sacrificed?
To summarize, they told me to leave the peasants alone or they'll leave the coalition. And considering what would happen if I allowed them to go, they forced my hand. This wasn't the only thing they forced my hand with. The radical left is now trying to cancel Stalin for 55 cases of murder, but that was 20 years ago. Still, they got him on trial, and while I'd want to let him go, that would make too many people mad at me, so I have to send him to a gulag. The socialists have an easier time with the Central Asia War because I'm forced to give the Kazakhs autonomy. So when things heat up in the region, I don't have a bunch of Kazakh rebels in my way. With a much further starting point, this goes from an easy war to a trivial one, and I united Central Asia under one Soviet republic. Okay, I was half paying attention to my volunteers before, but now I'm getting serious with them. First, by helping the Reds win in Spain. The light tanks are popping off with the cast support in southern Iberia. While this is happening, factions in the government from the left and right are asking for stuff, and when Levitsky asked for help, I just had him overthrown. It was at this point I realized I messed up putting the Bolsheviks in charge because this was not who I wanted, but I couldn't be bothered redoing the setup, so I'm playing it out. I can make new plans for this campaign. My light tanks lead the anarchists to victory in Spain, and next up, it's time to help the workers in the CSA. And you may wonder, what about Italy? And well, I think I'm too late. You know how I said I'd help my fellow workers in America? I changed my mind. There are workers closer to home that require our liberation. The beginning of the Finnish operation looks a bit dire, but once I got the cast flying, things would turn around in our favor here. However, in the south, things were turning against us. The Cossacks, after losing all their land, autonomy, and religion, were just a bit mad. Enough was enough for them, and with some Ukrainian support, they were rebelling in the steppes. I started my liberation of the Baltic states, and immediately the imperialist Germans stepped in to seize Courland. And that wasn't the only thing they would do. As the cavalry overran southern Finland, the Finns begged for peace. I wanted to take everything, but the Germans forced me to stop the war and settle for smaller gains. There was still one more country to liberate, and at least this one had no chance of German intervention. My cavalry was doing fine storming across the borders, but once I started getting into the country, the lack of infrastructure quickly caught up with my army. I saw Canada finally intervene in the American Civil War, and looking at the fronts, I don't think the CSA is gonna make it. Sure, I could have done more for them, but I say the best workers are the ones who help themselves. I have a time limit to defeat Mongolia, but not only am I being slowed down by the logistics, the AI keeps last standing their divisions. The reactionaries here are literally fighting to the last man to stop the liberation of Mongolia. And with less than 2 months remaining, I have to exploit any opening I can to capitulate the country before I lose. This was surprising to see though, considering the US isn't even controlled by MacArthur. We might actually see AI New England win the American Civil War without me doing anything. The cavalry in Mongolia was a great call. With their speed, I was able to snake the final Mongolian victory points in the far south and force them to the peace table. In 1940, there was nothing left to do except start the War of Liberation against the capitalists in Berlin. On March 30th, 1940, Russian forces started storming across the borders of all their Reichspakt-aligned neighbors. A few days later, the Third Internationale joined in, attacking German positions in Western Europe. The future of Europe is looking red, but is this what Europe needs? The socialists in Russia claim to be speaking for the workers, but how many have been silenced or killed to get to this point? And let's not get started on how they treat the peasantry or anyone outside the cities. There is only one hope for freedom and democracy to come to Russia, through the Free Russian Army. But who even is this Vasily Boldarev? Unlike most Russian generals, he was an ardent liberal. Back in 1929, he saw Savinkov's rise to power for what it was, a direct threat to democracy, and tried to shut him down with a coup attempt. Unfortunately, that did not end well for Boldarev, and he had to flee Russia for his own survival. Boldarev lived on in exile, never giving up on his dream of a democratic Russia, even when Savinkov finally became president. Boldarev organized the Free Russia Committee to coordinate resistance against Savinkov, which to his dismay did require a deal with the Kaiser. Despite Savinkov being overthrown, he wasn't content with the new leftist regime, seeing them as just another boot that will walk over the people. Only he could lead Russia to victory. So the Free Russia Army starts off as a government in exile and has a small focus tree to give me what I need to win. I start off with 5 divisions, although only 4 of these can actually fight. With the Reds being slightly pushed back in the Caucasus, I figured this would be a great front to contribute to since there is a lot of flat terrain. My first attempted offensive goes horribly. I quickly realize there are no supplies in Chechnya, and when I try to leave, the AI attacks and I almost get all my entire army wiped out. With Georgia being a death trap, I move up north since there's a lot more supply for me here. When my units actually have supply, I can start winning battles, and I take the city I can't be bothered pronouncing. With German military support, I can get more divisions out to keep the pressure going. It's not easy to get divisions here because most of Ukraine got overrun, but at least they kept the road to Odessa open long enough for me to ferry more boys over. With everyone gathered up, I begin an offensive to Rostov, and surprisingly, the AI helps me out by liberating Chechnya further south, giving me a solid base to put my capital. Unfortunately, I don't have the supply to take Rostov, so I instead focused my next offensive towards the southeast to liberate more Russian land in the steppes and link up with the Reichspakt in Chechnya. For the Free Russians, this was our first major victory against the Reds. While they were making gains everywhere else, we had destroyed half an army's worth of troops. It was important to keep the momentum going, so next month I began my second attempt to take Rostov. And fortunately, this time it worked out, finally getting me a city with some industry. Welp, it actually happened. The AI made New England win the Second American Civil War. That's a first for me. Because the Entente was busy with that, they never joined the Second Weltkrieg, so finally, over a year after it started, they came in. Things are looking up for the Free Russian Army. Now I can recruit militia units from all the states I liberate, which came at just the right time because the front is getting really wide. The Halifax Conference happens, and I have to say, reading these events, I've never seen such a submissive Entente. Like, did you remember to give the Kaiser your watch on the way out? Come on, guys, where's the backbone? I have my own conference with Semenov about the status of the Far East after the war, and when he makes crazy demands, for some reason it's actually better to just roll with it. Bro's basically asking to turn Siberia into his fiefdom, and there's no downsides. During the summer, the Free Russian Army balloons in strength with all the volunteers coming in from liberated states. My good troops concentrate and prepare for an offensive towards what will be Tsaritsyn. With that city's liberation, I have secured the steppes from Red oppression. Without Astrakhan or Tsaritsyn, they can't push south. Morale is high in the Free Russian Army, until it gets leaks that Germany intends to give up more Russian land in a future peace deal, which obviously wasn't taken too well by Boldarev.
What? No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
There was a way to keep our land. Fortunately, with enough army strength or casualties dealt to the Reds, we could counter foreign claims and keep their greedy hands off our land. I can counter Finland and Belarus with army size, but to stop Ukraine, I'm gonna need to inflict 1 million casualties. And as of right now, I'm not even on the list. So I have to start getting ambitious with the offensives I make. After I finished them off in the desert, I worked on the Reds around Milarovo. It was risky, but they didn't commit enough soldiers down here to stop me, so I got away with a lot of kills. Next, I was going to push into Ukraine and link up with the other Reichspakt forces to consolidate the line against these pretenders. Once we broke past Mariupol, other parts of the front started attacks to liberate southern Ukraine. The Free Russian Army soon met up with the Reichspakt troops from the Crimean sector and formed Russian lines into a large bulge. The next step was obvious. I would spearhead another attack northwards to liberate Kharkiv and meet up with the Ukrainian army southeast of Gomel. The AI was actually helping me out here with this, which was really nice. Russian cavalry and German tanks fighting side by side in a blitzkrieg through Ukraine. Once we retook Shotska, it was done. There was at least 2 armies cut off in Ukraine, and I even got a little bit extra with some divisions near Kursk. Because of the massive size of the pocket, it took a while to liquidate it. I had to constantly break it down into smaller pieces since my army isn't very large. But fortunately, by the time it was all done, I walked away with a majority of the credit for the kills here. In a year, I had sprung up from not being registered to second place on the casualty list at 981,000 casualties. All it took was one more pocket and I had finally breached the 1 million casualty mark needed to tell the Ukrainians hands off Russia. The Red Army was collapsing while people flocked to join mine. I gathered for one last offensive towards Moscow, pushing through Tula and Ryazan. Facing pressure from all sides, the Russians didn't have the strength to stop me, and soon the Free Russian Army raised a new flag over the Kremlin. The writing was on the wall now. The socialist regime was gonna collapse. They could keep fighting, but they weren't gonna win. So a peace deal was negotiated, where Boldarev and the Free Russian Army would take over to run things. Boldarev brought back the 1922 Constitution, and now I start my 4th focus tree in this game. While I rebuild democracy, I also need to rebuild the army because freedom in Russia can never truly be safe with the Reichspakt around. It's not going to be easy to rebuild because with the Treaty of Moscow, Germany put a lot of restrictions on the economy. German support, unsurprisingly, came with strings attached, so they were going to chain us up as tight as possible to avoid fighting us. In November 1942, we had our first elections, and of course, Boldarev swept the votes, unlocking a path forward to rebuild Russia's power on the world stage to challenge Germany. I'm told Semenov is up to no good in Siberia, but I'm not seeing any evidence of it. He is unironically one of the best generals in my army right now. I'm not gonna listen to the woke mob trying to cancel him, clearly out of jealousy. I found new friends with the Entente though, and I really appreciated the IADC boss for getting the economy back on its feet. But no matter what I did, I had no chance to catch up to Germany. They had 80 more mills than I had factories total. They had more military factories on tanks than I have military factories. That's how outmatched I am. I was getting tired of the Union of Britain still standing, so I decided to rejoin the war to finally get rid of them. I'm just amazed. We got the American, Canadians, Germans in this war, yet nobody can put out a navy in the English Channel. It's up to the Russians to establish air superiority and try to snipe small English patrol fleets. It would take a long time to establish naval superiority, and in hindsight, I should have just used paratroopers, but after 7 hours of playing Hoi 4, your brain doesn't think as well as it should. I had to suicide my fleet, but that got the British AI to stop projecting supremacy and allow me to launch the naval invasion. The British had tank divisions to respond to my landing, and I'll be real, they hit my cav like a truck, but fortunately the cast flying over England could take care of them for me. Once I established a beachhead, it was over for the Union of Britain. The cavalry with air support could overwhelm the British defenders, and soon the Second Weltkrieg reached its end. I didn't ask for any land. I tried to grab as many ships as I could to replace the destroyed Russian Navy and have a chance to get naval superiority where I wanted. And the game was like, oh, you want to have naval superiority as Russia? Well, here you go. Enjoy your new navy. By the end of 1944, I had finally built up enough military strength to break the Treaty of Moscow. It felt so good to get my industry back. But there was another problem now. Because of the Halifax Conference, most of the Entente nations had a non-aggression pact with Germany, so it was blocked from starting a new war with the Kaiser. Now, I spent over 2 years rebuilding Russia for this moment, and you're not gonna let me do it? I'd say this path would take a gold medal for edging the player, but I know about China and TNO, and if you played it too, you know nothing can come close to that. Fortunately, Boldarev has the power to get around such restrictions. And now the Entente is at war with the Reichspakt. There may be some consequences for me throwing the faction unprepared into the war, but I don't care. I want content. Georgia can't put up much of a fight against my mountaineers, and neither can Finland when I'm flying 800 bombers over them. These campaigns are relatively easy since they are small countries fighting by themselves, but when it comes to the main front, it's another story. Despite good initial gains in Ukraine, I actually have to fight German troops, but that's not really the problem, it's the German air. This is what I'm dealing with right now, and here's me for comparison. Remember, they had a quarter of my mills for 2 years, so they are bombing me with the planes I was forced to build for them. While my tank offensive is ground to a halt in eastern Ukraine, the German tank offensive is just getting started and threatening the vital city of Orel. At least Finland fell soon, so I freed up a bunch of divisions to fight on the main front, but the Germans got control of France in the meantime, so maybe they aren't hurting too much. German air made it tough to do counterattacks, but occasionally the AI overstretched itself and allowed me to get some easy Ws. The Reichspakt AI is very scary. I think I stalled their offensive on the gates of Moscow and have a moment to rest, only to look south and see they shifted men down there for another offensive. As you can see, I don't have much men to spare, so I basically have to give up the Caucasus to the Reichspakt and just hold the line from Tsaritsyn to Astrakhan. But while they're busy taking over all that land, I can make moves of my own with tanks by Moscow. Without any Reichspakt armor to counter me, my tanks break through their infantry and an entire army gets cut off, saving Moscow from any imminent threat. By wintertime, things actually slowed down, and while we've had our W's, we've had way more L's. Taking Finland was the only gain I made while I lost most of Western Russia and all the Caucasus, but that doesn't mean I didn't make them bleed for it. They lost a lot more than me to get this far. Too bad with 931 factories, they can easily afford that. When things started to warm up, we got on the move again. They have an overwhelming industrial and manpower advantage, so I have to go for big plays to inflict massive losses on the Reichspakt. Despite losing an entire army, they can replace this, but that takes time, so before they can get their reinforcements out, I have to continue to press my advantage. I push along railways to retake key supply hubs and create more opportunities to eliminate the invaders. By summertime, you could see the effect it was having on the Reich's lines. There was not nearly enough infantry to cover the front adequately, and you better believe I was going to keep taking advantage of it. If they kept losing this many divisions at this pace, the Reich would collapse this year. The Germans gathered their tank army for what I think was a push to St. Petersburg from Tver, but I prepared two pincers to push in behind them, one from Kaluga and the other from Veliki Luki. If they could meet around Verzhev, that would be a GG for the Reichspakt, cause that's all their offensive power. Things started off promising with their initial lines breaking, but the lack of supply in this area catches up to me quick, and with the German planes also on me every step of the way, the offensive runs out of steam. Now, one thing you may be wondering is what is the rest of the Entente up to, considering both America and a united India are on my side, and I'd love to know the answer to that too. Double my industry, yet only 114 divisions. I'm out here fighting for my life against the Germans, while my allies are out here struggling to take care of some Latin American nations. I kept trying all summer to make this encirclement happen, but it just wasn't happening. Then I saw the German AI move all those tanks away from this part of the front, and I can't overstate how painful it was to watch them escape. On the bright side, the Reich stripping this area of soldiers did make it easier to encircle, and I did manage to catch a good amount of units around Tver. The Germans used that tank army to make another attack towards Moscow from the south, and while they're focused there, I made my own attack in the steppes. All the Reich's divisions in this area were destroyed, leaving the door open to liberate the Caucasus again. My mobile units spread out as fast as they could before reinforcements could arrive to stop them. Meanwhile, the German tank offensive ran out of steam in front of Tula, forming a large bulge that had very weak flanks begging to be counterattacked. Now that my tanks were well supplied while attacking on flat terrain, they could actually perform well, and that tank army that escaped me last year isn't going to be so lucky this time. I caught 2 armies worth of divisions in front of Tula, nearly 600,000 men gone, and look at that amount of tanks lost too. The casualties were looking rough for the Germans, and the front was in pretty bad shape. The Reichspakt is having a bad year, but as you can see, it's only April. I have so much more time to make it worse. Finally, I was bringing the fight on their soil. My tanks blitzed through eastern Ukraine to reach Mariupol. With the city secured, I could use my Black Sea fleet to block the Kerch Strait, and since the AI isn't so good at evacuating from ports, I have effectively cut off another large army. But you know what's incredible? Despite all this damage, the Germans still have a lot of equipment in their stockpile. They may struggle for some basics, but with 620 mils, they can rebound fast. Like, as I'm cleaning up in the Caucasus, they're already launching counterattacks to push towards Moscow. I shut it down quickly, but like I said, they don't stay down for long. Once again, they launch a major armored offensive in Ukraine to take Rostov, but I'm getting better at responding to them. They always push a little too far, and some well-placed tanks on their flanks can shut them down. Final result, another dozen dead tank divisions, only another 40 to go. Good thing the AI doesn't learn from its mistakes, because the Germans did the exact same offensive again and lost even more tanks. For a while after that, things were going really well. We were deep into Ukraine, retaking the Baltics. America even launched a naval invasion of the Netherlands. It really started to feel like we were close to the end of the Reichspakt, but you see, if you just check the video time remaining, you'd probably notice there's still a decent amount of time left, and that's because some bad stuff is about to happen. A month after getting a successful landing, the Americans just leave it. What even is the point of having allies if this is all they're gonna do for me?
Well, my work is done here.
What do you mean your work is done? You didn't do anything.
Didn't I?
Despite my allies not doing anything, I still managed to push far. I got through the Baltics and Prussia to threaten the German heartland. I thought I had effectively split the fronts in two, but Poland, despite being officially neutral because they're an Austria's faction, had apparently given the Germans military access. So while I was focused on the Prussia front, the AI launched a massive counterattack through Ukraine. At this point, I think I'd been playing for another 7 hours straight, so that's a total investment of over 14 hours so far in this campaign. So hopefully that gives you some perspective on how done I wanted to be with this game, and seeing the AI manage to pull out this Battle of the Bulge offensive, like, it hurt to watch. They really were making me work for this win, because as I was dealing with the South, they were doing things in Prussia too. I had already lost 2 hours of progress. I needed to stop it from being 4 hours. I was able to build the ports needed to save the men in Prussia, but unfortunately the guys cut off in Crimea had no chance. We've lost a lot of men to get this far, but Germany has lost way more. Too bad they can keep replacing them. After taking a break to clear my mind and refocus myself, I came back to undo all the progress lost. I would hold the line at Danzig while my army would focus on grinding down the Reichspakt nations from the north, while their tanks were busy starving themselves in Siberia. After taking out Lithuania, I moved through Belarus, pushing alongside the Polish border so more troops couldn't move through that country. Ukraine desperately needed reinforcements as I slammed my way into the western part of the country, but fortunately, nothing was coming for them. The AI's priorities are really strange, because here I am pushing into Romania, basically cutting off all the Reichspakt divisions from Germany, and their response is to truck it to Moscow. Like, come on guys, we know how this is gonna end up, why are you even doing this? It's better this way anyways, because it makes cleaning up Ukraine faster, and once that country's dead, I know they're gonna stay dead, because there is no way Germany is gonna make it back here to Russia once I finish them off. With all of that taken care of, there is only one front left to focus on, but with such a narrow space, I'm gonna need to expand the front line to make use of my army. I was gonna have the tanks do a naval invasion, but the Americans were finally useful and did a landing for me. We made a decent beachhead, but I got a bit too ambitious and overstretched, leading to a German counterattack, causing me to take some losses I really didn't have to take. So I had to go back to square one with the naval invasion. This time with a much simpler goal of just breaking the stalemate around Danzig. The Germans didn't make it easy, but I got a sizable pocket of German troops. The tanks were slowly pushing towards Berlin. The Germans now have 800 mils, now on account of all the territory they conquered, but even with all that, they somehow managed to have empty stockpiles. Just shows how much they've thrown at me in the past 5 years since this war started. Well, both sides have thrown a lot at each other during this war. To divert German attention, I launched a naval invasion of Sweden. This worked as intended, as I was able to weaken the main German line enough to be able to push to the Austrian border, and unlike the Poles, they can't escape through them. Good to see me and the Austrians can both come together to screw on the Germans. Not even in my alliance have they done more to help me than India has. After that, I think the German army is finally broken, as I push deeper and deeper into its heartland. I'm past Berlin now and will soon be pushing into Bavaria. But the AI merely tricked me into a false sense of self-security because they had one more offensive in them to save the country. They gathered all their modern tanks for an offensive to retake Berlin. I was scared, so I force deployed barely trained reinforcements. My brave tank divisions managed to hold on to Berlin along with Stettin and Rostock, so the German counteroffensive didn't take any supply to sustain itself. When the reinforcements came in, I gathered them at the flanks and did another pincer attack. Manstein was the general in charge of this final counterattack, and with his defeat, I closed my jaws around almost all the remaining German tanks. I'm just imagining the Kaiser having a downfall style meltdown after hearing Manstein's counterattack failed. After this, finally, for real this time, Germany is actually truly cooked. Especially their demographics, since they're closing this war off with nearly 30 million casualties. So, it's done. The Reichspakt is over, and a new liberal order is set over Europe. What does Boldarev get for doing all this? Nothing! There is no content. I did all of this for nothing! So, if you enjoyed watching me waste like 16 hours of my life for this video, remember to leave a like so others will see it too. Thank you to my alumni on Patreon supporting my descent into madness. If you can help me out there so I can continue to make the stuff you love, and you get early access to videos. Don't worry, I will get the mega campaign going in February. I just needed to get through my backlog of videos for January. Hope to see you again, bye bye!